Hi, I'm Jerry Schiele. I'm an attorney with the estate planning and elder law firm of Parman and Easterday in Oklahoma City. We have offices in Kansas City, here in Oklahoma City, in Tulsa, and we service clients across the state and across this part of the Midwest. Today we're going to be talking about the subject of legacy wealth planning. Legacy planning is a little bit different than what most people think of. When most clients come into our office, they're talking about money and stuff. They're talking about how they protect those particular assets. But I put some notes on the board because there are things that to us are equally as important as money and stuff. Our experiences, our values, the lessons that we've learned through life, instructions that we leave for those after we're gone, the location of important documents, family history, and I might even add protection of the assets for the benefit of the family once we are no longer there to aid them. So let's talk about those in a little more detail. We had a client that passed away several years ago. His children lived all over the country. They flew in, they made arrangements with one of the local funeral homes for his internment ceremony, for the funeral service. They took care of everything. They arranged the obituary, they had the eulogy, they arranged for pallbearers, they selected the hymns, and they had a very nice service. Afterwards, they came in to meet with us, and when they were looking through the back of their estate planning portfolio, they found the legacy planning session and found that he had prepaid his funeral at a different funeral home. He had drafted his own obituary, he had drafted his own eulogy, identified who he wanted to come to the service and serve as pallbearers. He had made all these arrangements and prepaid them, and all of that went to waste because nothing was done the way he anticipated it being done, and because he had spent that money for his benefit, it was lost because it could not be transferred to a different person. So it's important for us to follow those instructions. So let's take a lesson from that. We need to leave instructions. We also need to convey those instructions. Our client did everything right but conveying those instructions to his family. Had they known that those arrangements had been made, there would not have been any issues. What about capturing family history? When my father passed away in 2007, even though I had spent years with him and I had heard his stories and shared his experiences for many of those years, they had faded. Over time, I had forgotten many of the details. And I made a commitment to myself that I would not let that happen with my mother's stories. So many years ago, I sat down with her and I had her capture her history in the legacy planning section of her portfolio. And I copied that and I sent it to all of our family. Well, last year in February, actually in January, she turned 97, and some of the ladies in the church were interested in her story, and so I made copies of that for them. One of the ladies became very enthused and said, "Grace, I want to sit down with you. I want to go through the pictures. I'm going to put together a book." And she did. They spent hours and hours going through pictures and identifying who they were, where they were, what they were, how they were, what was important about them. And then she took Mom's story and she put it into a book. That book was finished in April, and my mother was thrilled. Copies went to everybody. She took copies to the church, to the senior center, to anybody that she could think about. And then 2 months later, she passed away. What a loss it would have been had she had not had the joy of sharing her life, and had we not had the joy of being able to share it with her. Let's talk about another story. We talk about location of documents. We had a client pass away several years ago, and she had 5 siblings. The 5 siblings came into the office and they were downcast. And I said, "What's wrong?" Well, this client was worth more than $1 million. Probably quite a bit more. They said, "We know that she has investment property. We know she has rental property. We know she has investment accounts. We know she has bank accounts. We cannot find anything." Well, fortunately, we had the estate planning documents in our office, so we were able to provide that to them, but that turned into a multi-year search. They had to hire experts to try to track down those assets, and when they finally stopped, they weren't sure then they had identified everything. And it involved several counties, a couple of different states, and it became a very expensive, tedious process for them, and they worried that they weren't doing it right. So those are important things. What about family history in a different standpoint? We had a Vietnam veteran about 5 years ago now. He was beaten up by a gang and left to die. I was called by Adult Protective Services, who asked if I would agree to be his guardian because of my involvement in the military community, and I agreed to do that. I went to court. I was appointed as his guardian. Our office took responsibility for him. We put him into an assisted living center. We met regularly with the doctors and the staff. We took care of all of his needs. We were unable to find any relatives. When he passed away, we had to file a probate for his estate. And eventually, 36 third cousins who had never seen him, did not even know he existed, showed up to bring their claim. So that money went to people other than whom he wanted it to go to, and we had no idea what his family history was, where he came from, other than the few documents we were able to procure. So it's important for us to know who the people are, what they have, what they've learned, what they've gone through. I think all of these stories are important to us. We run into situations on a daily basis where people have not taken care of business. If you do the location list in your portfolio, or create one if you don't have a portfolio. If you keep track of where your trust property is. If you tell your family what your wishes are, where you want to be buried, what you want to have happen to personal property. We had a situation not too long ago that turned into a very difficult situation and a 3.5-year drawn out trial because a son and daughter could not agree on who should inherit what. And because they couldn't agree on the tangible personal property, not the money, not the real estate, but the stuff, that wound up going to court and taking 3.5 years. These are just a few of the lessons we run into. So I think it's important that we capture all of these, that we think about how do we plan for that funeral and who do we tell about it? How do we make sure our wishes are carried out when we're gone? How do we make sure that we capture that legacy of our family? I have one last story I want to talk about. My brother and I recently tried, well, over a number of years, have tried to track down my grandmother's family. We know that my great-grandfather and his father and mother and a brother came over from Loch Lomond, Scotland. We know that he married an Indian, a full-blooded Native American. We tried to go back to Scotland to trace his family, but all we had was his name, and we found there were hundreds of people with that same name. So that was a dead end for us. We tried to track down my great-grandmother's family. When she married, she took an American-sounding name rather than a Native American name that she was born with. And when we tried to go back to the tribal registry, we were unable to locate her because we didn't know her original name. So that part of the family tree just died. I think it would be fascinating to know more about that part of the family, what they did in Scotland, what they did in early America. But that's lost to us. So it's important to gather that information, share that information, and do it right. So how do you do that? Write things down. Share stories. I feel so blessed that I was able to spend time with my uncles and my father and my father-in-law and hear their stories of World War II and other experiences. I wish I'd had a recorder, but I didn't. But I do have memories that I want to pass on to my children. Make copies of the photographs, and not just pictures, but where they were, who they were, what they were, why these pictures are important, so that they have meaning to the family and they're not just looking at a picture of old people and saying, what's this all about? Store them, do blogs, do websites, create a DVD. There are many ways to capture this information so that it goes forward for the family. Every day we see people trying to trace their heritage. We see television programs where people are going back to try to find out what their lineage is. Let's make it easy for them, because it's important for us to have that sense of family. So I encourage you, think about more than money and stuff. Think about your legacy, your parents' legacy, your grandparents' legacy, and those that came before, and capture those legacies so that your family will have that history and that experience to build upon. If you don't do it now, nobody else will. Thank you. Again, I'm Jerry Schiele. I'm with the law firm of Parman and Easterday. I hope this has been somewhat informative and that you'll take some lessons from it. Thank you for watching.